has advised me that we have a quorum, and those appearing virtually have been tested for sound quality. So I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 72 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, Social Development, and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to House Order of June 23, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and virtually using Zoom. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to advise you before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. For those appearing virtually, please use the raised hand icon at the bottom of your surface. As well, you have the option of choosing to speak in the official language of your choice. If interpretation, translation is interrupted, please get my attention. We will suspend while it is being corrected. As well, please remember no screenshots of today's meeting while it is in business shall be taken in the room or on the screen. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, October the 17th, 2022, the committee will resume its study on financialization of housing. Again, the witness appearing virtually have been, sound quality has been checked and we're okay to go. I would like to welcome our witness to begin our discussion with 5 minutes of opening remarks followed by questions. And I would ask witness please stay as close to the 5 minute as possible. In the first hour appearing is Christiane Spillfogel, Chief Investment Officer, Ray Sullivan, Executive Director, Canadian Housing and Renewal Association, and Michael Brooks, Chief Executive Officer, Real Property Association of Canada. And we will begin, we'll start with Mr. Sullivan for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair Morrissey. Hello, bonjour, kwe to everyone listening and attending. The Canadian Housing and Renewal Association, we're the national membership-based association representing nonprofit and affordable housing. My name is Ray Sullivan. I'm the executive director. Our members are nonprofit and co-op housing providers, advocacy organizations, rental associations, provincial, municipal governments. We're trying to provoke system-wide action toward the right to housing by all, and our members have the expertise to get that done. I want to focus my comments on one important solution that will blunt the impacts of financialized rental markets, and that is supporting nonprofits and cooperatives to purchase existing rental properties and preserve affordable rents and protect those homes. And as I build to that, there's two key things that I want us to be very aware of. The first is that there is one single interconnected housing market. So whether it's new ownership, the resale market, high-end rentals, older affordable market rentals, and for-profit rooming houses, they're all part of the same housing market. What happens to one link in that chain rattles all of the other links too. And for low and modest income people who are most economically vulnerable, if that chain rattles enough, they find themselves without a home at all, or paying more than half of their income on rent every month and at risk of losing their home every month. The second thing that I want us to be aware of is that there's a business model at play here that is causing significant harm. And I want to break that down a little bit further. So first, rental properties are valued based on their cash flow. This is different from purchasing your own home, let's say. So picture two identical small apartment buildings side by side. They're identical in every single way except one of them has higher rents, probably because most of those tenants are new, and one of them has lower rents, probably because most of those tenants have been there a long time. So the property that has higher rents, that generates a higher net rental income, is worth more on the market than one with lower rents, even though they're otherwise identical. It's not that complicated. So if you're buying a rental property, you want to look for something with low rents, rents below full market value, because that gives you the greatest capacity to raise the rental income and thereby raise the value of your real estate asset, and then you can sell that asset for much more than you paid for it. Simple enough. Now, markets adapt quickly, right? So the rental real estate market knows that those properties with lower rents, which often means longer standing tenants, those units can be flipped over and rental income can be increased. So now what happens is that the market values the property based on the potential rents, the inflated rents, rather than the actual rents. And this is a cycle that inflates property values, and that impacts the whole housing market. But what does this mean for the people living there? Well, it means if you've been living there for a long time, paying a more modest rent, you're a problem for that new property owner. You're getting in the way of the owner growing their asset value or generating the rental income to justify what they just paid for it. I think of my grandmother who rented the same apartment in Montreal with her sisters for about 40 years. So here we have increasingly a business model in rental housing that wants grandma out of there. This is a cycle that sees grandma's affordable rent as an obstacle. So the things we need more of, housing security and stability and affordable market rents, they're put at risk by this business model. And we see this clearly in any examination of the affordable housing crisis, a massive loss of homes that rent at levels affordable to moderate income and low income households, a spike in average rents. In fact, with year-over-year increases in available rents in the double digits right across the country, far outstripping the growth in incomes. And this is leading to a much higher levels of housing precarity and of homelessness. And it's an obstacle to households entering the ownership market. It's our immigration targets at risk. It harms our economy and our productivity. This is the cycle fueled by financialization. So how do we interrupt the cycle of financialization? Well, relative to other OECD countries, Canada has a very small supply of nonprofit and co-op housing. 30 years ago, community housing represented 6 or 7% of the overall housing supply. Today, it represents half of that, about 3 or 4%. And of course, when we're talking about community housing, the objective and mission of these organizations is not to increase the market value of their assets. It's to provide secure, affordable housing. But their purpose is to make sure grandma and her sisters has a stable, affordable home for as long as she wants it. A good supply of community housing stabilizes the rental market and ensures a supply of rental housing affordable to people with low and middle incomes. So let's talk about moving rental housing properties from column A to column B, from a business model where grandma's affordable rent is a problem, to one where grandma's affordable rent is the very purpose and the objective of what we're trying to achieve. So supporting nonprofits and cooperatives to purchase existing rental properties and preserve modest rents, that's definancialization at work. And this isn't a new thing. Decades ago,
could you
government...
come to a conclusion, please?
I'm wrapping up very quickly. Decades ago, government community housing programs supported organizations to purchase existing rental properties and operate them as community housing. The National Housing Strategy includes no such program, and we have an opportunity to fix that. It's faster, brings fewer risks, and costs less than new construction. Don't get me wrong, we need to do both, but I'm calling on the federal government to work with the community housing sector to create an acquisition and preservation strategy for existing low end of market rental housing properties. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. We'll now go to Mr. Spilfogel. Did I get it right?
Well said, Mr. Chairman.
5 minutes, sir.
Very good. So, good afternoon. I'm a director of the Eastern Ontario Landlord Organization, or YOLO, which was founded in 1990. YOLO represents rental housing providers of all sizes who together own and operate more than 40,000 rental units in the City of Ottawa. YOLO is a member of the Canadian Federation of Apartment Associations, or CFAA. I understand John Dickey, the president of CFAA, will be speaking on the next witness panel. Mr. Dickey provided me a copy of the CFAA's brief, which was made jointly with the Federation of Rental Housing Providers of Ontario, or FRPO. I'm also the vice president of the Ottawa Real Estate Investors Organization, or OREO, established in 2002, which consists of small-scale real estate investors and people who provide expertise and services to them. Both from my own rental holdings and small developments, and from Oreo colleagues, I'm familiar with the issues facing small-scale landlords and developers. I and many of my colleagues develop and operate rental housing through small corporations, which is very common even for relatively small investors and rental housing providers. I agree with CFAA that the reason market rents are rising is because supply has lagged behind the growth in the population and in rental demand. That is largely because of excessive government charges and taxes that raise the cost of new housing development, and also because of delays in approving new construction. I have experienced that myself in a number of developments, as have my colleagues. CMHC recently estimated that Canada needs to increase the total housing supply by 3.5 million dwellings by 2030. That would be twice the recent annual new supply. That strongly suggests that small investors, REITs, and corporations of all sizes should be encouraged to provide more rental housing rather than facing more or higher taxes or restrictions, which tends to discourage entry into any market and thus tends to decrease the amount of rental housing supply from what it would be under the current rules. The size and sophistication of rental housing providers varies greatly, but virtually all private rental housing providers want to earn a reasonable net income and raise the value of their buildings. We do that by providing good value for money and efficiently managing costs. Rental housing providers of all sizes seek to operate buildings at the optimum level of service and cost. That includes improving rental buildings to meet higher environmental and accessibility standards and modernizing units when renters' demand for modernized units makes that productive. If tax rules or CMHC mortgage rules are changed against rental developers, I would expect a flight of capital, both among large developers and small. I already see small-scale Canadian investors who used to develop in Canada now investing in American states, which are more development-friendly. They look for locations with growing rental demand, fast approvals, modest government charges, and no rent control. In fact, there has already been a significant increase in the demand by Canadian investors for education on investing in U.S. real estate. Regulating against financialization and seeking to limit REITs and other for-profit rental housing providers would be counterproductive. It would reduce investment in new rental housing and in modernizing aging rental stock. In a very short time, such restrictions would reduce rental supply and rental availability and drive up market rents. Indeed, we have seen this in the past. I urge you to recommend against restrictions on REITs or corporations, big and small, and against new tax rules seeking to influence behavior, especially in areas of provincial jurisdiction like rental laws. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spilfogel. Now, Mr. Brooks, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Michael Brooks, and I'm the Chief Executive of RealPAC. I'm a career lawyer, having spent 30-plus years doing real estate transactions with a private firm and 26 years running RealPAC. RealPAC's a 53-year-old national trade association representing institutional and public real estate companies coast to coast, all asset classes, all vehicle types, including pension funds, corporations, public and private, trusts, commercial real estate funds, and REITs. And I'm with you today, obviously, to talk about purpose-built rental and financialization for housing. Mr. Chair, the economics of our sector continue to change every day. Nearly a third of households in Canada live in purpose-built rental accommodation. Higher housing prices alongside a growing young demographic and increased immigration, which apparently was 1.1 million people in 2022, up 2.7% of our population and the highest since 1957, has led to strong demand for rental accommodation in recent years after a low in August of 2020. In August of 2020, the students were not here, and our members were giving rent subsidies to fill their buildings up. With the rising cost to build, rapidly rising interest rates that are nearly doubling the financing costs of new projects or even tripling them, new purpose-built supply is rapidly diminishing and will likely continue to do so. In places like Toronto, the cost to build apartments is approaching $800 a square foot, and for condos, north of $1,200 a square foot. In both of those cases, giving higher interest rates, most new developments don't pencil out. Up to 30% of the cost of a new unit is government fees, charges, and taxes, including federally GST on the value of the building as soon as construction is completed. Meanwhile, higher operating costs, including much higher interest rates, spikes in construction costs and natural gas prices, increased taxes, fees, and charges, increased wages, are putting pressure on owner operating costs. This puts upward pressure on rents even before one talks about repairing, maintaining, and upgrading old buildings to meet modern standards, fire codes, and building codes, including potentially air conditioning and decarbonization requirements. We know that Canada needs 3.5 million additional housing units by 2030 to restore affordability, according to CMHC. But it sometimes takes up to 5 years to get housing approved in many cities in Canada. As many new projects are potentially shelved, this will be a challenging target. Our sector requires capital to build and repair housing. These funds require a return on investment, whether it's new capital for renovation or new capital to build another building. A return on investment is required, and heavily taxing those dollars is counterproductive. The purpose-built rental market is indeed capital-intensive. Business and continuing to attract private sector capital will be critical. RealPAC supports the right to adequate housing and is prepared to have conversations with everyone, of every political stripe, including our not-for-profit colleagues, about how to move this ball forward and how to maintain a state of good repair. But we do believe that good repair and professional management is the way forward. We have 4 ideas we proposed in our submission. Rental support programs, absolutely necessary at all 3 levels of government, and we support those continuing and indeed being enhanced. It's better to upgrade an older building and support the tenants left behind than not repair them at all. We need to secure new construction through a sustainable and competitive funding model, like the U.S. Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. Canadianize it, bring it to Canada. We're thinking internally about an industry code of conduct. How does RealPAC set a high bar for everyone in our industry? Something we could work on together. And finally, we think we need to establish an industry advisory council to work more collaboratively with everyone in the federal government about real solutions that are practical and that will work. So with that, I would say the private sector has the speed, the scale, and the scope to solve these supply problems. We're 96% of the market. We need to be at the table with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. And before we begin, I want to welcome to our committee MP Hanley and MP Tolmie, as well as guest MP Maurice, who comes. So with that, welcome to the committee. We'll begin the first round of questioning with Mr. Aitchison for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the panelists. Thank you for being here. I want to start with Mr. Brooks, and in your brief, you spoke about that in Canada there's I think 6 publicly traded residential REITs, and that accounts for about 6% of the Canadian rental world. And after about 30 years of operation, that's what it amounts to. So this is about 3% of the primary and secondary market for all rental accommodation in Canada. And so there's been a lot of talk about REITs around here, and describing them as, bad actors and that kind of thing. And so I wonder if you can just elaborate on that. I mean, knowing full well that there are bad players in every industry, can you talk a little bit more about REITs and why they are actually an important part of this mix?
Thank you, through the chair, for the question, Member Aitchison. So, look, REITs exist in 42 countries around the world and growing. They're in every G7 country. They allow small investors to buy big-ticket real estate on the same basis as wealthy people can. It's the retail investor that is the winner in all of this. Many people invest in REITs for retirement income, for example. Big pension funds might invest in REITs because real estate is a good counterpoint to bonds and stocks. It's a good asset class generally. The REITs, I think, are among the best class of landlords in Canada. The best class of landlord in Canada. Why is that? They have access to capital. They can fix buildings up. They have tenant portals. They have professional management. They have reputations. They have ESG statements. They are amongst the best class of landlords in Canada. Australia is trying to attract a build-to-rent system. So is the UK. The REITs are a very good example of build-to-rent in this country.
Thank you. And just further to that, you also note that that the not-for-profit sector is an important part of this mix as well. You're not suggesting for 1 second that there's not a role for not-for-profits or co-ops and that kind of thing to be a part of solving this problem.
Absolutely agree with that. The private sector can build market housing. We can dip a little bit into the affordable or deeply affordable space if we can make the pro formas work, but we need everything below that on the income scale to be handled by government partners and not-for-profit partners. And so happy to work with Ray Sullivan, with Tim Richter, with others in this space. There's room for everybody in solving this problem.
Thank you for that. I'll turn to Mr. Spilfigel now. I want to go back to something that we heard from a recent National Housing Strategy report where the chief economist from the CMHC said, and I quote, that in the reality in Canada is about 95% of the rental market is provided by the private sector. So financialization is something that exists by design in our rental market. And in an environment where a growing population, there's more demand for more rental units, we need more financialization in order to get more supply to meet the needs of a growing population. Financialization is a dirty word around here, apparently. Could you speak about that a little bit? Do you agree with that statement? Would you elaborate on what he's saying there?
Well, I can't put words in his mouth, but what I see is that the private sector is absolutely key in terms of developing the scale that we need. One of the pieces here that Mr. Brooks just talked about was the relative percentage of different types of different categories of landlords. So when we take a look at the total rental universe, which is about roughly 5 million rental housing, only half of that is done by large scale, or actually it's half of it is in the primary market segment, right? So as defined by CMHC, which is 3 units and up. And out of that, roughly half are provided by small landlords, small developers. And then if we take a look at the secondary market, it's another 2 million. So it's almost half. And that is predominantly from the small landlords, small investors. So when we take a look at the overall market there, there's a lot of small players that are potentially impacted by what is decided by the committee.
Just excuse me, the bells are ringing in the House. I do need unanimous consent. There are 30-minute bells, as you can see. To continue, I'm under. Okay, we will continue until what? Usually. Okay, well, we will, what's the wish? I was in a committee yesterday where all the members chose to vote from the committee room using the app. So what's the wishes of the committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have a little bit of time, so we can probably finish off on this and get one more round in, and then we can head to the chamber.
So you want the committee to
Adjourn,
suspend
so we can go vote.
for
Suspend so we can vote. Yeah.
and come back.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I can only move with unanimous consent. So we will continue then with Mr. Aitchison, and then we'll go to Mr. Collins. Mr. Ferrata, just a moment.
Can we just convene on the time? So usually it's 10 minutes before. Is that good? 10 minutes before. Usually that's committees what they do.
10 minutes?
10 minutes?
10-minute mark?
You have time to cross the street for 10 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, like, if we could do 15, 10 minutes is we're in like the 4th floor in Wellington. It's not like we're in West Block. That's a little bit more reasonable. So 15, I think, would be more reasonable.
Okay, we'll try to get in the first round then. Mr. Aitchison, you have a minute and a half.
Okay, thanks very much. I can be fairly quick with that, I think, Mr. Chair. My next question is actually for Mr. Sullivan. I know that two gentlemen speaking from the perspective of the private sector rental housing providers acknowledge the importance of the not-for-profit sector as well. Given the scope and the scale of the crisis in housing in this country, do you believe that the private sector has an important role to play in solving this problem as well as the not-for-profit and public sector?
Yes, and through the chair, absolutely, there's a role for the private sector. What's important as we talk about rapidly escalating housing starts and increasing the housing supply is that we're very aware and mindful of the share of that needs to be non-market and community housing. We're not going to solve the housing crisis by adding $5 million homes or $5 million $3,000 a month rents for one-bedroom apartments.
Thanks.
That's going to be out of reach for a significant number of Canadians.
Sorry, I'm running out of time, but I really want to quickly ask you, and what do you think that the right mix should be? You mentioned that it used to be about 6%, now it's about 3%. What's your opinion? What is the right mix?
I would agree with the report from Scotiabank that came out a couple of months ago saying we need to double the relative share of nonprofit housing. So we need to get up into the range of 8 to 9%.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Aitchison. Now to Mr. Collins for 6 minutes, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the witnesses for their attendance here today, virtually and in person. I'll start with Mr. Brooks. Mr. Brooks, over the years as City Councillor, I had the opportunity to work with a REIT that purchased a number of properties in my municipality and specifically in my ward. And then subsequent and after their purchase, I had the opportunity to work with the tenant associations who were interacting with with the REIT. And I have to say I could probably write a book on it, but I won't share you all my experiences today, other than to say that I think most people open their arms to the fact that there was going to be a massive investment in the renovation and repair of the 5 buildings and 1 townhouse complex that were purchased. But at the end of that year-long, 18-month renovation process, there came an above the guideline increase, and then subsequent to that, there was an approval for a rent increase. And so what was at first celebrated as a great opportunity to improve the quality of life for residents was soon received as something different than that as it relates to higher rents and the inability to pay for those AGIs that were approved over consecutive years. As a legislator, I'm interested in certainly finding ways and means to support the private sector, who are very important as it relates to creating new supply and helping us with renovation and repairs. I'm interested in finding a way to encourage those renovations and repairs, as you've highlighted your industry does. But I'm also interested in ensuring that when that happens, those rents stay affordable. Can you comment on that in terms of how to address that issue, which can be a very complicated one and a very important one for tenants who are living in a very affordable unit only to find themselves in a unit a year later that is very much different from a price point than the one that they were in prior to the arrival of the REIT?
Yep, I think it's a very good, through the chair, a very good question, very good point, and it's probably something that a lot of owners struggle with. There's only certain types of improvements to a building that are recoverable under an AGI, at least in this province in Ontario. There's often a long amortization period for that expenditure. It's mission-critical items only. So for many owners, it's trying to get the building up to a standard and perhaps reduce the repair and maintenance costs going forward in the near term. But you might leave some people behind. This was my point about having a better system at all 3 levels of government for rental support programs for those in need. I think it's better to approach it that way than to prevent the AGIs, prevent the repairs and maintenance from happening at all. So I know and many times this is a building by building assessment. It's hard to generalize.
So how do we leverage then your access to capital? I mean, you've highlighted, I think, here today, your ability to invest in properties. And what I want to incentivize is the creation of new supply. And I think your industry has recently pivoted from the just purchase existing stock to build new. I live in a place here in Ottawa, which is a former hotel. Prime example, great example of a REIT purchasing something, creating new rental stock. How do we incentivize the creation of new supply, hopefully affordable supply, and maybe look at ways to disincentivize your purchase of existing stock that has some of the complications that I referenced earlier as it relates to rising rents?
Well, I would say on the former, in terms of new supply, I mentioned in my comments that many new projects, whether you're a for-profit or not-for-profit entity, don't pencil out because interest rates are higher and overall costs are higher. So we need a break somewhere in there. Land costs for free, for example, municipality rolling in land for free. Lower interest rates, grant monies. I've talked about this low-income housing tax credit, Canadianized, which applies to not-for-profits and for-profits. It's a very useful tool. Been in place in the U.S. since 1986. So on the supply side, we need a cost or two to be dropped, or perhaps some of that 30% in taxes to be reduced. On the existing building side, if I could just finish, I don't think you should disincent that. I think that we need to, maybe through my code of conduct I'm talking about, find a way to upgrade that building, extend its useful life while being aware of who's left behind, and deal with them humanely and fairly.
Thanks for those answers. Mr. Sullivan, can I ask you the same? The carrot and stick approach as it relates to legislation / government investments that incentivize new supply and maybe discourage the purchase of existing stock that results in higher rents and some relocated residents because of either renovictions or something similar to that?
Yeah, and I thank you for the question. And I think this is something that we need to keep an eye on when we're talking about this. This is where people live. This is the stability and the foundation of their lives, when we're talking about their homes. And the number of people being displaced through the rental market is extraordinary. A report came out from the University of British Columbia a couple of months ago showing that across the country, about 65% of all evictions were so-called no-fault evictions. So people who paid their rent, people who were good neighbors and didn't disturb the other neighbors in the building and were getting evicted from their property. There are definitely cases where people are being removed from their homes so that the landlord or the owner can invest in the property and renovate. There are also cases so that people are doing renovations so that they can remove the tenants and increase the rent. And make no mistake, rents are set based on what the market will bear. It's not a set percentage above landlord costs. If the landlord can get a higher rent, well, landlord will. That's business. That's completely fair. What I'm saying is we need to balance that with a healthy supply of community and nonprofit housing for people who are vulnerable in that kind of marketplace.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. I'm just going to we do have resources to go to 6 o'clock, so if it's okay, we'll go to Madame Chabot for her 6 minutes, then suspend for the vote, and then resume with Madame Zarrillo. Is that okay? Okay. Madame Chabot, pour 6.
You have 6 minutes, Madam. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to our witnesses. The study we are considering is of the highest importance because we are discussing the financialization of housing, and this has to do with available housing. We know what the needs are, and we know that affordable housing is difficult to provide for a number of reasons. That said, the National Housing Strategy covers a number of programs with public investment of about $80 billion. It seems essential then to, yes, create affordable housing, but also ensure that these buildings remain affordable on an ongoing basis. Mr. Sullivan, thanks for your opening remarks. In your view, because you've talked a lot about community housing and working in that sphere, do you think that the federal government is doing enough to create low-income public housing outside the general market? Thank you for the question. I'm terribly sorry. I will use English just to be sure I get my message across correctly.
So, the federal government made a huge step with the National Housing Strategy 5 years ago, and it was a welcome return to that space where the federal government was very active before, and it has had an impact. The challenge is that a lot has changed in the landscape in the past 3 years, in particular, with interest rates, with cost, with the general housing market. It's important to pivot and update those programs in the National Housing Strategy to fill in the gaps that weren't there 5 years ago. For example, as I've pointed out, acquisition of existing properties as a quick way to move things into a nonprofit and affordable column from the private market and to protect those tenancies would be one example.
Do you feel that the National Housing Strategy should put most of the amounts to outside of market housing, outside the general market?
Amount of that $85 billion in the National Housing Strategy actually goes to the Rental Construction Financing Initiative, which is geared toward private sector new supply with modest levels of affordability, and that's changing a little bit now. We're actually seeing less funding available in recent years for nonprofit and community housing supply, particularly as the cost, as Mr. Brooks and others have pointed out, which have gone up for the nonprofit sector just as much as they've gone up for the for-profit sector. As the cost to borrow money in particular have gone up, the amount of grant money available through the National Housing Strategy has actually gone down in recent years, and I think it's time to revisit that and to strengthen those programs.
You have suggested budgeting for a program for buying affordable rental housing. Why would that be so helpful? And why would it help provide a alternative source of housing, nonprofit and community?
There are a great number of properties right now with tenants who are paying below market rents in the private market. But what we're seeing is when that owner sells and when the property changes hands, we're seeing those rents rise rapidly and escalate, often displacing the tenants who are there. So this is a strategy to protect those tenancies, those homes, particularly people who've been in those homes for a long time, and to make sure that those rents don't rise anywhere near that same pace that they would in a private market. What we're asking for is for the government to invest in a fund, and we know that there are other investments that we can leverage from other sources to make best use of that as well. This increases the supply of nonprofit housing, protects those existing tenancies, and also increases the capacity of the community housing sector through growth.
Yes, that would surely be a measure that we need to study seriously, given that we are very concerned about affordable housing and sustainable ongoing affordability of the housing as well, without, of course, preventing the private market from contributing. We know that it contributes greatly. So what is the new approach we should take? What we've heard is that we should prevent financialization with a national housing strategy, that we should focus much more consistently on a below-market rental supply. And what's the key, do you think? What's the essential element that we should make sure we include in a national housing strategy to shift the situation?
To be targeted toward affordability. There's no question that we need to rapidly increase the supply of all forms of housing. I think government does need to look at tax incentives and other marketplace incentives to increase the supply of rental housing. I think there needs to be an exchange around affordability. You can look to older programs in the 1970s and 80s, for example, that allowed for accelerated depreciation of capital assets in return for modest rents. They were very successful, and a huge proportion of our rental supply comes from that era under those kinds of programs. I think we need to revisit that at the same time, and we need to have a full market response to this. So the private and nonprofit sector at every point on the income scale to address the supply shortage and the affordability crisis.
Madame Shabat, we will now suspend, and for the benefit of the witnesses, we will resume 10 minutes following the announcement of the vote in the chamber. So until then, we'll suspend, and we will resume at that timeline. Suspend. Zoom its meeting, and I thank the witnesses for standing by while members had to conduct their duty, which was to vote. So we will now resume with Madame Zerillo for 6 minutes. Madame Zerillo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do appreciate the witnesses' their patience with that with the vote. I wanted to start my questioning with Mr. Sullivan. And Mr. Sullivan, I was a city councillor for about 8 years, and I mean, it was obvious that there was a gentrification going on. Certainly in my riding of Coquitlam, we're now just recently reported the 3rd highest rents in the country in my riding, and I can see it manifesting on the ground in communities as more and more people struggle to find homes. So my question to you is around, why does Canada not have a healthy supply of stable rental tenure for people?
Thank you for the question. It is very much a supply issue. And, you know, up until the mid-1990s, we invested in rental supply generally with incentives for the private market. But as importantly, we invested in community, nonprofit, and co-op housing. That investment curtailed drastically after the mid-1990s. So what we're seeing now is the impact of a failure to invest in those decades. And it has gotten better. You know, we've recouped some of that ground in the past 5 years, especially under the National Housing Strategy. But a lot more needs to be done to get there. And a lot of studies have shown that for every affordable rental home that gets built under National Housing Strategy programs, we're losing multiple homes. Some say, 4 times as many, sometimes say 10 times as many in the private market that are renting at that low end of market level. And this is the kind of housing that we need to preserve. And this is why an acquisition and preservation strategy is one good option to do some of that.
About supply, I mean, unfortunately, I sat with a council that had a very high level macro view of supply and demand without really that finer point. So is there, for the record, a serious lack of affordable housing supply rental tenure in this country right now?
Unquestionably.
Is that due to a lack of investment over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, or all of it?
About the last 30 years. And it's great to see a lot of focus being paid to reinvesting in the supply of housing, especially rental housing and especially non-market and affordable rental housing. CMHC did come out with a study, I think it was just over a year ago, saying that we needed to increase the pace of new home construction by over 3 million units to catch up and balance that market. And they're coming up with a follow-up study to break that down by income groups. And I think we need to target and keep our eye on affordability as we're trying to solve an affordability problem. We need supply, but we need to target the supply that is going to make the biggest impact. And that's the supply that's accessible to people with middle and more modest incomes, which is difficult for the private market to produce on its own.
And that was one of my questions here. You know, how does the market create affordable, secure rental tenure for low and middle income Canadians without government support?
Yeah, and Mr. Brooks and the witness from Yolo, talked about housing allowances, rental subsidies. That's definitely a part of it. But really, the stability is going to come from a solid supply of non-market housing, of co-op and nonprofit housing dedicated for that purpose. Security of tenure is higher than in the private sector. Affordability, especially over time, gets stronger and stronger as it goes on. And this is where, again, as I said before, I'm 100% on board with what Scotiabank called for last year to double the relative supply of non-market housing.
So just in relation to the National Housing Strategy, you mentioned to revisit the National Housing Strategy. So I just wonder, has the federal minister or the Federal Ministry of Housing convened a roundtable, a check-in, a review with not-for-profit and co-op providers across the country that you're aware of?
The minister held some roundtables on some national housing strategy programs just a few weeks ago, and I've been working with CMHC to develop a standing advisory group that can help to refine and create those kinds of programs that are benefiting from that practical on-the-ground experience that our members bring. But I do think it is time to step back and look more broadly at the national housing strategy because enough has changed in the last 5 years. programs that were designed for a period of stable costs and low interest are not necessarily going to be the right programs for today, where those things have changed.
And thank you for that. So CMHC, when Romy Bowers came to this committee, talked about how they'd been out of the business of supportive housing for such a long time that they didn't necessarily have the skill base within the organization anymore. Are you seeing this roundtable that you just spoke of as an opportunity to work closer with CMHC and maybe re-educate them on how to work in these partnerships?
Yes, and this is what our members are, that expertise. You know, our members for decades have been doing this work on the ground in communities, and we're happy to collaborate in any way we can to strengthen that impact.
Okay, thank you so very much. So I also wanted to ask Christian from Alaferis, if I could just ask you, what kind of supply do you feel is missing in the market right now?
That's a really good question. And I was answering earlier saying that about, my estimate, 70 to 75% of housing is provided by very small landlords. So to me, that's part of the tool of creating availability. But we need a balance between private market and publicly funded housing. There is certainly, and Mr. Sullivan's made some excellent points in terms of making sure that while the private sector is a key tool for scale, we do have an opportunity to take a look at public housing and public funding for those of us in the private sector that can't necessarily provide that particular type of housing.
Thank you.
Madame Zerillo and Mr. Aitchison for 5 minutes, which will be the final round with these witnesses. You have the floor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I want to go back to Mr. Brooks, actually, and you referenced the number of units that the CMHC says we need to get built by 2030 to restore affordability. It's a crazy number, and certainly at least double a year what we would have to do than the best year we've ever had. Can you give us some thoughts on, I mean, you know, how corporations are treated in terms of taxes and incentives and all that kind of stuff are one thing, but the physical act of building that many units, how are we going to do it?
That's the toughest question I've had so far through you, Mr. Chair. How are we going to do it? Here's the problem. We don't have enough manpower in this country to double production of housing in the period that we're allotted. We need to tweak our immigration system to bring in a lot more skilled labor and not just simply reward economic immigrants. We need to get into the high schools and tell our younger folk that a trade is a good career, and much more of them should be pursuing that career, because so many in the labor pool right now are boomers like myself who will be retiring soon. So that's another barrier. Look, 2030 is 7 years away. I mentioned earlier it takes 5 years to get approvals in a lot of cities in Canada, even if we were to start right now. With a rezoning application or a site plan approval application or whatever it is, it takes so long to get through some planning departments. We really need to focus on speed. And we've always said in our industry, we need as-of-right zoning. When I started my career in the 80s, we had as-of-right zoning. You could put up an apartment building, just go in and apply for your building permit. As long as you comply with the building code, you're building as-of-right. Maybe you do it, look for a minor variance to close in the balconies. That was it in the 80s. Now, everything is a craft. Everything has to go through series and series of meetings. So those are two.
So I want to elaborate a little more on that. Clearly, all levels of government has skin in the game and have some responsibilities here, and municipalities are definitely on the leading edge of this, the front lines of the housing crisis and the housing situation, and a lot of the solutions. If there was some more consistency and things were easier in terms of the municipal approvals process, and some more certainty, investment likes certainty, right? Could you comment that? Do you think there's any sort of innovations that we might see in the construction industry that would make the construction process faster if there was some level of certainty in the process that made those investments pay off?
I'd love to see a modular construction industry in Canada. we were able to build a big modular construction housing plant near a major market and have all the builders commit to buy from that modular housing company, that would be a great way to speed up construction. We don't have such an industry yet in Canada, and I'm not sure we have the scale yet unless we did aggregate buying. But I would love to see that. Other initiatives are cross-laminated timber. You know, CLT buildings go up much quicker. They're much greener. And that's another possible innovation.
Could you speak as well, too, to the concept of one of the things we've talked a lot about, the governing party, and certainly our party has talked a lot about the concept of unloading underutilized federal buildings. I know that the conversion of office space to residential space can be difficult and doesn't always make sense in terms of affordability. But what about things like free land? There are other options out there. You know, and particularly in larger centers, I'm thinking that might be an option there. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely, I think that is an option. I know that in the City of Toronto, they have an agency who has been looking to lever the city's vacant and underused land. I think federally, you have Canada Lands Corporation, which is charged with disposing of excess surplus lands. I'm thinking of Downsview Airport. There's a massive site at the end of a subway that could have a lot of housing on it. But there's got to be other examples around the country where there's big federal land sites that could be used.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. I think I'm out of time anyhow. Thank you.
A few seconds, but thank you, Mr. Aitchison. Mr. Van Bynen for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the gentleman coming forward and giving the benefit of their perspectives on the issue. The one thing that concerns me, and I've heard it over and over again, is that the business model currently doesn't work. You can't, I think your terminology was, it doesn't pencil out. It doesn't make sense. And as a municipal mayor, I would challenge anyone that would ask the municipalities to give up their development charges, because there's a very thorough analysis of why those funds are required because of the impact that they have on the municipalities. So let's set that one aside. So the other items are the increasing cost of construction, the interest rates, and the cost of land. So you're suggesting that if you could get no cost or low cost land, that the business model could be workable and there would be some interest in it. How would a municipality, or how would an organization like CMHC put together a proposal that would work and give consideration to those components so that you have a business model that works? How could we approach something like that? I'll start with
which one?
Mr. Brooks.
CMHC, that's obviously they're in the interest rate business. So with CMHC, I think getting super low interest rates, 1%. Float 1%. Every pro forma is going to be a little bit different across the country, so you have to almost go through it on a pro forma by pro forma basis. I mean, a development in Newmarket might be different than one in downtown Vancouver or somewhere else, but super low interest rate might move the needle to get something to pencil out.
So what length of commitment would be required to make something like that, or would that be subject to negotiation? Example, some of the co-ops, I think, were committed to 25 years once the mortgage funding was paid down, that the conditions of affordability would no longer have to apply. So how long would the industry be prepared to commit the rental rates on the basis of the cost to produce the units that you're going to be renting out?
Again, a very good question through you, Mr. Chair, and it's subject to the pro forma. So if I take the example of inclusionary zoning. So we went through an exercise of inclusionary zoning in the City of Toronto, with some requiring a percentage affordable in a new development that just killed pro formas, and still does. So it all depends on the individual project, whether that's 10%, whether it's 15%, 20%. If you said to me 100% of it has to be deeply affordable, I will tell you now it probably won't pencil out, even at a 1% interest rate. So it's all a question of looking at the numbers and seeing which works.
Is there an appetite for the industry to consider those types of arrangements? And I'll turn that over to all three. members.
Well, I will respond first. Absolutely. I'm seeing it now. If you look at Regent Park, Daniels Corp., who have done it effectively there. Look at Taz Corporation. Look at Dream Impact Fund. It's happening all over the place, but it's a discussion across the table with numbers.
And the challenge to that is we go by tender, we go to the cheapest price, and we can't negotiate arrangements because of the criticism that our organizations subject ourselves to so often. Go ahead, Christian.
Sure. So when we think about the construction of housing, we realize that about a third of the cost is obviously in soft costs, right? And I think that was mentioned earlier. And then we take a look at all the hard costs going in. If I take a look at the City of Ottawa, to build a one-bedroom apartment in order to justify the rents based on existing costs means that there's a rental floor of about $1,700 a month. Right, so that's actually a really important piece, because if we're talking about affordability in there, it necessarily means that we need to find ways to drive the cost of that construction down, and I think that's kind of where you're getting at. So soft costs are an obvious place to take a look, including things like HST in there, some of the DCs or the development charges in there. The mortgage costs are obviously a significant piece in there, and so with CMHC doing what they do, it's actually helpful in releasing capital to create new housing. My only wish, if I had one wish with respect to CMHC, is that if they were to underwrite a little less conservatively, it would actually enable more capital to be invested to create new housing.
Thank you, Mr. Van Buynen. Your time has expired. Madame Chabot, pour 2 minutes.
2.5 minutes. Mr. Christian Spielvogel, I'm trying to get my mind around the approach. If I've understood you correctly, you've said that it's not possible to offer affordable housing given the cost of construction. But affordable housing is what we're looking for. And it's something that we're looking for on a long-term basis. So what can you contribute without, it being, kind of speculation on the market or arm twisting or...
Is that I'm not responding in French. It's just I want to make sure that I'm clear. So right now, what we're looking at in the private industry is the private industry can probably solve about 90 to 95% of housing needs within the overall population. And that means that the private industry is a piece that the government can leverage in order to be able to do that. As I was saying earlier to Ms. Zarillo, part of the concern is that the private industry can serve almost everybody but can't serve certain segments of the population. And in that capacity, there is a responsibility with respect to the government to be able to help that particular segment. And that may be 3%, it may be 5% of the population. But what we need to be able to do is make sure that we properly leverage private industry to solve the big piece of the pie here.
Do you agree that
the national housing strategy should give most of its sums to the below-market rental sector?
Because I haven't looked at the details of the national housing strategy, to be fair, so I don't know exactly what they're funding.
Merci, Madame Chabot.
Thank you, Ms. Chabot.
See Madame Zarillo. So if nobody objects, Mr. Morris, you get a quick question.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'll be honest, it's no surprise to me that at committee today we have some large corporate landlords who are receiving preferential tax treatment, and they're telling us they want to keep that. So I'd like to ask a question of Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, as you might know, I've been joining others in calling for real estate investment trusts simply to be taxed as other for-profit corporate landlords already are, and to use those funds to build more of the affordable supply of housing that we need. And this isn't about villainizing any one group. It's about ensuring tax fairness across the board and using every tool available to build the affordable housing we need. In recent years, we know that corporate financial landlords have increased their stock up to 20% of Canada's rental stock. At the same time, over the last 10 years, we've lost 830,000 units of affordable rental units. So I guess my question to you, to Mr. Sullivan, do you feel there's any justification for maintaining corporate tax exemptions for REITs?
Mr. Brooks mentioned an interest in maybe adapting the American low-income tax credit program into a Canadian context. This is the kind of opportunity where tax incentives are coupled with actual public benefit. So, if there's a tax break, what does society get in return for it? And in this case, it could be investment in affordable housing. So I think there's a lot of will in the private sector to address this problem, but I think we need to make sure that we're targeting those incentives toward the core of the problem, which is affordability. The other witness mentioned the floor of $1,700 to build a new apartment. That's actually the minimum level of affordability for the median income in Canada. So half of all people in the country cannot afford any rent higher than that. Good luck finding a $1,700 apartment in any urban center in the country right now.
Thank you.
So something clearly has to be done.
Madame Chabot, a question, please.
You mean Madame Cirillo? Sorry. I thought you had said that that was the last round of debate. So very quickly then, I'll ask Mr. Brooks around my question. How long do I have?
2 minutes.
Okay. I'll ask a question around basically what was obvious to me that was coming as I was sitting in my city councillor chair. So I'm going to ask you, did the private market see this disaster happening in regards to the financialization of housing for people and corporations that, for people and corporations that had the money that could benefit from it to invest in housing? We saw these condos being built at exponential speed. We saw the interest rates being super, super low, and people of wealth and corporations came forward and bought those homes. Did your realm, your organization, you yourself see this disaster coming and see that this was going to be a crisis in our communities of homelessness? And did you do anything to offset those realities that have transpired on the street?
Thank you, Mr. Ella, through the chair. Did we foresee this coming? No. I don't represent the condo builders. That's a separate group and market from our members. We represent people who build long-term income-producing property. We respond to market demand. We're permitted to do so across the country. Did we expect immigration to go to 1 million people? No. I mean, it's spiked. Did we expect 800,000 students to come into Canada? No. And my colleague, Mr. Moffat, will talk about the lack of student residences across this country as being part of the issue. So no, we didn't. The job of the market is to respond to demand, and we're trying to catch up with that demand as quickly as we can. But it's, as I mentioned, a slow process, and right now it's difficult.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Cirillo, and thank you to the witness. That concludes the first round. We will suspend while we transition to the next witnesses. So thank you, witnesses, for appearing today and taking questions from the committee members. We'll suspend. if you noticed, there is a larger spectator group at the back of the room, and this is a group of students that are up. Mr. Coteau, Mr. Coteau knows this group.
Yeah, are they there in the room today?
Wanted to watch the parliamentary process, so they had reached out to me a while back and said if they could come in the last half hour to a committee that was underway, and this is on housing, so I said, please do. And then we're joined by our colleague, Arif, so welcome. And we're now moving into the second panel. The committee is studying financialization of housing, and we have with us this afternoon Dr. Gael Fadida, Coordinator Political Affairs, and Mélanie Miranda, Coordinator Housing from the Alliance des Maisons. Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness is Tim Richter, President and Chief Executive Officer. And the Canadian Federation of Apartment Associations, John Dickey, is President, is in the room with us. We will start with 5 minutes to Dr. Fadida. Doctor, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Bonjour. Hello. Our alliance, which is an alliance of second-stage housing providers for women and child victims of domestic violence, some 35 such houses in Quebec. I'll touch on something that was said earlier. I don't always agree with everyone, but indeed there's about 5% of the population who do have these specific needs and for which the government does have a more particular responsibility, including, of course, for women and children victims of domestic violence, whom we attend to. For us, the issues in programming which aren't adapted to the needs of victims is of concern. The procedures are too rigid and too complex, and the aims of the programming aren't necessarily in line with the needs of the women whom we serve. Third, this has been said by other witnesses. These envelopes try to cover the private market and the nonprofit and community housing market, but without really speaking specifically of community housing or nonprofit housing, rather speaking of affordable housing only. And there is this percentage of very people in great need who do need specific help of a community nature. You don't have a copy of our brief, given that it hasn't yet been translated, but we are sending it through shortly. So we need more funding, specifically earmarked for community housing. In the spirit of this sector, where confidentiality, for example, must be respected, we must maintain a certain veil of silence over what we do. We have to protect the women and children victims of domestic violence. There is unfortunately insufficient community housing to be able to serve this population. Even when community housing is available, we would have to ensure that a certain percentage of it be made specifically available to victims of domestic violence. We would like to ensure that specific amounts be designated for this sector of the population. We also ask the government to back all the recommendations made by people working for the right to housing, that people who have published recently their requests, very reasonable requests, and we would like to ensure that their suggestions be fully analyzed and that gender-based analysis be applied to that as well. There have been targets for women, which we negotiated with Minister Duclos, and we're not sure that this is being respected. They're certainly not being respected in the province of Quebec. I would have many examples I could give you to really demonstrate the problems we have with the current programming, where we're often competing with other services, competing with the private market. the time allotted to make requests is very short, and of course, private markets and well-organized community housing or not-for-profit housing can make these requests much faster and at a lower cost than many of us who are serving vulnerable populations. We're working with an 8% of the women who have even greater needs than those who are generally in shelters. We cover basically the needs of women who are in domestic violence situations that are highly complex and where they're truly at risk. Here we are. One last point. Given the security issues affecting the population we serve, we cannot have more than 15 units in any house that we're working with. So our projects cost more. That's why it's important to really note the difference between housing needs of very specific population groups with specific needs and not put us in competition with the private market, because it's really clear that we don't have the same capacity as the private market. The lack of housing, shelter housing, and second stage housing is really a major problem and is well known to many. Thank you, Ms. Fadida.
Mr. Richter for 5 minutes or less.
Great. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to appear today. As you know, the term financialization is normally raised in the context of behavior of some market actors who will purchase low-cost, older rental housing and increase the rent to generate more profit. Often they do this by evicting existing tenants. This contributes to a major problem in Canada's housing market. As you know, Canada is losing affordable rental housing at a really alarming rate. According to housing policy expert Steve Pomeroy, over 550,000 units of housing that's rented below $750 a month were lost between 2011 and 2021. That means, obviously, that there's fewer and fewer options for low-income households. But financialization alone, this issue alone, isn't the problem. The bigger issue here is the erosion of affordability in the rental housing market. There are many experts who can give you a better analysis of the rental market and affordability issues that we face, and you've heard from some already, but it strikes me that there's really three key factors. First is a lack of rental supply. CMHC says Canada needs to build 5.8 million homes of all types in the next 9 years to restore affordability. But Canada's only built 570,000 units of rental units in the last 30 years. So we also have a dire lack of deeply affordable social and community and supportive housing. And these supply constraints and increasing demand drive increased rent and decreased affordability. Second issue is the cost of new construction. It is 3 times more expensive to build new rental housing than it is to purchase and convert existing housing, and it's also way faster. So there's a clear financial incentive to the market to purchase old housing. Third, lack of provincial regulation and tenant protection. Without tenant protections, an investor can buy a property cheap and increase the rent to whatever the market will bear. In provinces where there's rent control, there's often a loophole or there's no control on vacant units, which creates a financial incentive to evict people to increase rent. But if we only attack one element of the problem, actions by some of those market actors who purchase low-cost, older rental units, raise rents to generate more profit, we won't solve the affordability problem. Further, we might actually make it worse by pushing out desperately needed private investment. To restore affordability in rental housing, we need to create about 1.74 million units of purpose-built rental housing. Building this much rental housing would cost at least $610 billion. Unless governments are prepared to invest that much, we need private investment. So it's critical that we stop the loss of low-cost rental housing and aggressively add supply of market affordable and deeply affordable housing. So I'd like to propose 7 potential solutions. 1, make purchasing existing rental housing less economically attractive. And one option to do that would be to tax the purchases of rental housing by private investors above a certain number of units to target large-scale purchases, or tax the profits from those purchases. 2, as Ray Sullivan mentioned earlier, create an acquisition fund to allow NGOs to purchase and renovate rental housing and protect low-cost rental. This has been done in British Columbia, and as soon as it was announced, apartment owners, REITs, and others were coming out of the woodwork to sell some of their older buildings. It's a great way to preserve existing affordable housing. 3, create economic incentives to build. You've heard some of those ideas. For example, accelerated capital cost allowance, low-income housing tax credits, other finance and tax tools could be very effective. 4, push the provinces to put in place tenant protections to prevent rent eviction. This could potentially be achieved as part of infrastructure and housing investment negotiations. 5, I'd recommend revamping the National Housing Strategy to generate at least 350,000 units of deeply affordable rent-geared income housing units, including 50,000 units of supportive housing. 6, provide urgent rent relief to low-income households. Canada right now is under a wave of new homelessness on the same scale as Canada's largest natural disasters. People are being pushed out of their housing by huge increases in cost of rent. We have proposed the creation of a homelessness prevention and housing benefit that could stop or at least significantly slow this deadly wave of new homelessness. And we can protect low-income Canadians until new housing can be built. It will be far more expensive to solve homelessness after it happens than to prevent it in the first place. And finally, revamp the Canada Housing Benefit. 3/4 of people in core housing need are there only temporarily, and they're all in housing. Housing benefits can be used to provide temporary affordability support and respond to sudden changes in the housing need or affordability, leveraging existing private and near-market housing. Thank you all very much for the opportunity. I look forward to discussing.
Thank you, Mr.
further.
Richer. Now, Mr. Dickey for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm just setting my alarm to make sure I don't go over the 5 minutes. But you won't tell me every minute as I work toward it. So I am the president of the Canadian Federation of Apartment Associations. CFA represents 15,000 owners and managers of over 1.5 million rental homes across Canada through 13 member associations and direct memberships in CFAA. My main professional qualifications are first-class honors BA in economics and a long career acting as a lawyer in rental housing. Starting 40 years ago, I acted for renters for 6 years, renters and tenant associations. And I always like to tell our members that so they don't hear it from somebody else. I'm open that was where I started. But since then, I have acted for rental housing providers of all sizes. Many people picture rental housing as apartments in large buildings, such as one can see in any large city. However, many other apartments are found in walk-up buildings of 3 stories or in 3, 4, or 5-unit buildings. Quebec is famous for the plexes, the 4-plexes and the 6-plexes. Over 300,000 rental homes are row houses. All of that together is the purpose-built rental market. It totals 2.5 million homes. Besides that, there are a little over 500,000 rental homes in social housing, also called community housing. And then there are 2 million more rental homes that many people are unaware of or ignore. Those are the rental homes in the secondary rental market. They are rented single-family homes, duplexes, doubles, accessory apartments, and rented condos, whether in condo towers or ground-oriented complexes. Anyone can drive or walk down many city streets and not realize that those homes are rented. But there are 2 million of them across Canada. That includes Toronto, where there are 200,000 of them. The total rental supply across Canada is 5 million homes. The details of this are set out at page 2 of CFA's joint brief with the Federation of Rental Housing Providers of Ontario. Now, most rented homes of all types are good substitutes for many others. Apartments and towers compete with low-rise apartments and rented condos, as well as the rest of the secondary market. Because of this widespread competition and the fragmented nature of the rental housing industry, large rental providers have no power to set rents above the levels determined by supply and demand. Another key issue is how much money rental providers make. Some people picture all or most of the rent money going into the landlord's pocket, but the truth is far from that. At page 3 of the brief, you will find a pie graph showing where a typical dollar of rent goes. Starting at the top at 12 noon, 14 cents on average goes to property taxes, 12 cents for utilities, and 19 cents for other operating costs. That makes up 45 cents out of every dollar of rent, leaving 55 cents as what is called the net operating income. But we're not done with the expenses. On average, another 36 cents goes to pay the mortgage, and 11 cents goes to pay for major repairs and building modernization. That leaves just 8 cents out of every dollar of rent as the pre-tax return on each dollar of revenue. And then there are taxes. Now, to make its report, the committee will have to choose between two very different views of REITs, rental housing corporations, and indeed all rental housing providers. CFA condemns any action to push people out of their homes. However, under our Constitution, it is up to the provinces to regulate and prevent such action. In addition, CFA believes that such action takes place only in very isolated cases, and that federal tax law is much too blunt a tool to address that isolated behavior. Instead, tax changes such as those proposed could easily have widespread and serious negative impacts on the supply of rental housing. Excluding REITs or corporations from CMHC mortgage insurance or other housing programs would also risk widespread and serious negative impacts on the supply of rental housing. In conclusion, financialization is not nearly as significant an issue as it is said by some to be, and the proposed cures being suggested to this committee are much worse than the alleged disease.
Thank you, Mr. Dickey. We will now go, this round is going to be 5 minutes instead of 6 to each to see how we go. Thank you for visiting, students. Mr. Aitchison, for 5, please.
There must be something I said, Mr. Chair, but I knew I was going to start. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. I want to start with Mr. Richter, actually. And I specifically want to speak to some of the comments you made in your opening remarks. The comment about, if we only attack one element of the problems, actions of some market actors who purchase low-cost, older rental housing, raise rents, we won't solve the affordability problem, and we might actually make matters worse. And in the cause of restoring affordability in rental housing, we needed about 1.74 million units, and scaring away private sector investment is not going to help with that. So what I love about that, I think, is that you recognize that we need all hands on deck, and we need all players involved in this. And we're not trying to demonize anybody in particular. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit, Tim?
Yeah, well, I mean, the part of our challenge is that we're in a significant hole, right? And so you're in a hole, you got to stop digging. So we got to think of a way to slow or stop this loss of affordable rental housing. You can, as I said, you can probably do that through a combination of creating an NGO like Ray Sullivan talked about before that, like a fund that you could purchase some of these older units and just make it more attractive to build and less attractive to buy, and the market will naturally go to where the best economic opportunity is. And this behavior and this will likely shift. I think you want to be really careful about that heavy blunt instrument approaches where you take them, you're changing the tax treatment of the REITs, or you're making large-scale sweeping tax changes. I think you can be quite a bit more targeted than that, but you do have to disincent that behavior that causes the loss of that housing. But again, the impact of that loss of housing is magnified by the lack of housing supply.
A great segue, actually. Thank you for that to John. John, at the end of your comments, you kind of pointed that you said that rent evictions are not nearly as common as I think maybe the hyperbole would suggest. Other witnesses have said they are, and it's a major issue in this country. And I'm hearing from Tim that sweeping changes in tax rules, against REITs would maybe exacerbate the situation. So can you talk a little bit about how common are rent evictions? I mean, obviously we don't want that to be happening, but we don't really have the authority to stop it here. So can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yes. Statistics Canada surveyed tenants in 2021. They found that 7% of tenants had been evicted at some point in their lifetime. Now, assuming the average tenancy experience is 10 years, and for many people it's 20 or 30 or 40 years, but assuming 10 years, that means 0.7% of tenants are evicted each year. In other words, 7 out of 1,000 tenants. StatsCan went on to ask the reason for the eviction, and only 10% of all evictions were for demolition, conversion, or major renovations. That means that in any year, less than 1 out of 1,000 tenants is evicted for those reasons. And deducting demolitions that are needed for intensification or new transit lines, we can estimate only 1 out of 2,000 tenants is evicted for renovations. The vast bulk of evictions occur in the secondary market for the sale of a property or the owner's own use. Then we have conflict with the landlord or other tenants, and we have arrears of rent, and it is a tiny fraction of a small number of evictions that flow from renovations. There's another table in our submission that addresses that with older statistics from the Wellesley Institute and Anti-Poverty Group. It's on page 7 in the submission.
So you're saying that the vast majority of those kinds of evictions don't happen in a lot of these in the purpose-built rental buildings. They tend to happen more in the secondary market.
Well, a large landlord, a corporation can't claim personal use.
Right.
They don't sell single units typically. It's smaller investors, and believe me, I represent smaller investors too, and I want them to have the right to use their property as they wish to do so. But that's a question for provincial law. The point is, those evictions, the vast bulk of evictions, are not for major repairs.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Aitchison. Now, Madame Martinez Serrata pour 5 minutes.
Merci. Now, Ms. Ferrata for 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. You've just mentioned the provinces, and this is a good segue to my question. My question is for Mr. Reach and Gail Fedita as well. Mr. Richters, rather. You know that at the government, we legislated on the right to housing, which led the government to think through public policy for housing based on human rights. We have now a defender of housing rights and so on and so forth, a commissioner. How do you think that the human rights approach applies to financialization of the rental market? And how do you think that jurisdictional matters can be turned to better purposes, the provincial power in this matter?
Right to housing, I think that's key to eliminating homelessness in Canada, and I supported and lobbied for the creation of the National Housing Strategy Act. Now, the challenge with the National Housing Strategy Act is that it applies only to the jurisdiction of Parliament. So it doesn't yet apply to provinces or territories, but I do think In terms of this particular issue, I think if it applied to provincial legislation in particular, it would mean that tenants should not be evicted simply because simply to increase the rent, right? So they would mean they would have security of tenure.
Oui, merci, Monsieur Dick. Est-ce que
Yes, thank you. Gail Fedida, do you have any comments for that? Yes, in our opinion, there is of course the right to housing, but also the right to safety for all citizens, and in more particularly for women in our case. And these as well are human rights and a mandate of any government, be it at the federal or provincial level. In the provinces, then, this counts as well when it comes to safety and the requirement of any government to ensure that women be safely housed. Well, this is what is relevant to our work with women victims of domestic violence. Thank you. So everyone agrees that this is a provincial matter. Well and good. But what can we at the provincial level do? We have taken some steps, but what more could the federal government do? Could we do with legislative measures, with relating to this human right and, of course, to safety? I understand that the statistics, Mr. Dickey, about renovictions seem low to you, but I'm from Hochelaga County, and this is a major problem in our area, renovictions. Whether it's 1% or even less, these are real people. No one should be renovicted just because someone wants to make more money on a building that they're buying. I would like to hear Mr. Richter and Ms. Fedida on how we can do better. Now, I listened to the presentations of my fellow witnesses. There's a real power that the feds have with taxation, so that would be a useful approach. So that's for one. I'm not sure if Tim Richter would like to add anything. But yes, indeed, of course, taxation is a tool. Should we ask, then leave a little time for Mr. Richter? Good. Go ahead.
So I want to take issue with one data point that my Mr. Dickey presented. There was some data from, just to put it in real terms, the Stats Canada data. There's estimates that between April 2016 and April 2021, 253,000 to 331,000 renter households containing 531,000 to 770,000 renters were evicted. That may, as a percentage, it can seem fairly small, but you're talking about 770,000 people who were evicted in that 5-year period. In terms of tools that the federal government has, I think there's a couple of things. One is if the federal government is getting into leadership on housing, will make major investments. There's usually agreements between the federal government and the provinces or the municipalities who they're contributing cash to. They can put conditions on those transfers, obligating or pushing the provinces and the municipalities to respect the right to housing. And so they could do that. Under international human rights law, all subnational governments are bound by this treaty signed by the federal government. Canada is bound by international human rights law to respect the right to housing. And
Thank
there
you,
are
Mr.
tax
Richard.
measures, as I mentioned.
Merci, Madame Ferrada.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez Ferrada.
Madame Chabot, Mr. Richter has advised me that he has to leave at 5:50. So, Madame Chabot, pour 5 minutes. So,
Ms. Chabot, you have 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. I will use this 5 minutes to put some good questions. My first for you, Mr. Richter. You mentioned a number of recommendations that you are making to strengthen the stability of affordable housing. So when it comes to slowing financialization, and indeed our study is aiming for that, of course, you suggest that we should make the purchase of current rental property less likely and not as good an economic decision. So one possible strategy would be to tax such purchases, especially for properties with a certain number of units, a high number of units. I apologize to the interpreter if I'm not putting this clearly, but could you just tell us a bit more about that approach, how you see it playing out on the ground?
Well, I wish I was a tax policy expert, but I'm not. I do think, though, that those, you can apply taxation to purchases of property. In that case, then you can apply some kind of tax that ultimately you don't want to damage the overall corporate structure. You don't want to damage necessarily the REIT structure, or you just want to even out the economics between purchasing and construction, right? So you could apply a tax over a certain number of units, so you wouldn't necessarily also damage the smaller investors. But I think a targeted federal tax on the purchase, on large-scale purchases, because some REITs are buying and selling thousands of units, right? Like 25,000 units in single transactions. I mean, that's incredible. So if you can slow that kind of change on the large scale and on the larger end of the small owners, so 50, 100 units, you could have a significant impact on financialization. But I think the probably the most efficient way to slow financialization is through provincial regulation on vacancy control.
Over and beyond slowing financialization, should we also create more rental property that's below market?
We absolutely have to. We have to. I think at least 350,000 units of.
And why?
Sorry?
And why would we need to do that?
Pourquoi il faut le faire?
Oh, well, we need to do that for no other reason that there are lots of Canadians who will never be able to afford to live in market housing on their own without assistance, right? There's, the market simply cannot house people who are living on income support, unassisted. So if you're on welfare in any province, you will not afford to be able to live in market rental housing without some assistance.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I think that that's the right way to think of this. Ms. Fedita, thank you for being with us. I would like to applaud the extraordinary work that you're carrying out at the Alliance of housing providers for victims. We know how important this is to the women whom you serve, that it's important that they be safe and have safe places to live. So thank you so much for your work. You have mentioned how important it is to have this housing, and it's true that there probably isn't enough community nonprofit housing. And of course, not community housing isn't the same thing as affordable housing. And you're right to underscore the difference. With community housing, in your case, is more than affordable. It also has to be safe housing, and it has to meet the needs of that specific population. So what more do we need to do? What do we need more beyond our specific housing so that women be able to access housing? Yes, so that women be able to access housing. Well, what we have is specialists who work day in and day out with our clientele to help find housing for women so that they can leave the shelters. Those who are in serious danger, we keep them longer because we're unable to put them anywhere else. That's the problem. Yes, so I imagine just finding any housing is difficult. It's not simple. No, it's not a simple matter. We really have to go almost door by door knocking to see if we can find something that's safe and affordable. I know that you're in the Laurentides, just north of Montreal, and we have to work really, really hard with someone on a one-to-one basis to find something and then to convince the owner to take a renter who's a single parent, for example, who might have problem paying the rent eventually, and so on. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Chabot. Ms. Arillo.
5 minutes, and that actually may conclude us.
Thank you. And I am going to carry on with questions to Madame Fadida because the gender-based violence problem in Canada is only growing and through the pandemic. And I just note that my colleague, the member from Nunavut, brought this into the House on the 26th of April, saying that in the territory that she represents, that those women who are forced to live with their abusive partners, and the government needs to hear that these women are forced to live in abusive situations because of the lack of housing, because there are no shelters, and because the justice system is not protecting them, and that the government needs to recognize how failures in investing in Indigenous housing leave women living in fear and unable to find safety. And I heard that too in my own community. Tri-City Transitions in my community of the Tri-Cities can't find enough housing to keep women safe. So I guess Ms. Fadida, if you wouldn't mind just sharing how the pandemic has affected your clients looking for housing.
La pandémie d'abord,
Well, the pandemic at first led to having fewer women coming to us for assistance because they didn't leave their homes. Access to housing, however, has gotten much worse since the pandemic. Given that women who were able to get out during the pandemic, yes, they managed to get housing, but then when you leave a shelter or a second stage housing provider like ours, then where do you go? That's the big issue. And it's our responsibility to help them remain safe when they leave us. We can't just put them out on the street until they have a safe place to go. The last statistics out show us that with very close assistance, we're able to ensure that 72% of them do find adequate housing. A third, however, don't. Either they go back to the violent domestic partner. Unfortunately, at least 5% of those whom we have helped have gone back to violence or wind up in other types of housing that's inadequate to their needs. So I'm not entirely sure if they're finding less housing since COVID. That's really part of the overall circumstances with the current housing market. That's what's more relevant, I think, than COVID. There's no priority given to these women, you see. They have no way of insisting that a landlord give them a lease. There's no special incentive that would lead a landlord, the private market, to provide them with leases. There is an attempt being made in Quebec. There is a pilot program underway with rent support for victims of domestic violence. So that is of some help on the private market. That said, landlords aren't necessarily thrilled to take such a person on. And there's so many procedural elements that it's easy for them to find someone else before we finish with the paperwork. That's what I was saying about how difficult it is to actually get the person through all the hoops. That's the issue. We have had some confirmation for housing by some federal institutions. That was agreed to in 2022. We're now in 2023, and the final agreement hasn't been signed yet. Once it's signed, it'll still take a long time for it to actually hit the streets, hit the ground. So the procedural hoops, it can take 5 years, for example, someone said, to start a building. It takes way too long. Housing starts take too long. All the administrative elements take too long. The SCHL might be able to work on that, and the federal government as well.
I've got just a few seconds. I just also wanted to, just for the record, there was a UBC study that came out recently that said BC has the highest rental eviction rates in the country at almost double, at 10.5% versus 5.9%. So I just wanted to echo what Mr. Richter was saying about we are in a hole and we need to stop digging.
Thank you, Madame Zarrillo. That concludes. There's not enough time left to begin another round. We have a hard stop at 6 o'clock. So with that, I want to thank the witnesses for appearing this afternoon on this important study, and just remind that I was questioned on a timeline for submissions, written submissions on this report. It looks like we can go to the end of June for any party that wants to provide a written submission to the committee on this study that will be used in consideration of the final report. So it'll be the end of June. So with that, committee members, there being no further business before the committee, is it the wish of the committee to adjourn? Adjourn.